Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're just going to get into chapter one and do a little bit more of a closer read. Hopefully, you already finished reading it, and if not, what are you doing? Go read it. Just to summarize, real quick, again, it's a very scenic opening for Of Mice and Men. So, a lot of description of Salinas, California, where the story takes place. Again, it's in the 1930s, just about. So, Great Depression, Dust Bowl type era, and we get these two guys walking along, George Milton and Lenny Small, right? George Milton, again, kind of this smaller frame guy, very quiet, and he's accompanied by Lenny Small, who is this gigantic dude, and Lenny is simple-minded, right? And we learn that pretty quickly throughout chapter one. And basically, as chapter one progresses, you just get Lenny and George kind of talking, and us getting introduced to the different traits of these two guys, and some foreshadowing throughout as well. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But yeah, it's really just about getting to know these two characters that we're about to spend, the rest of our time with. So that's really all that happens in chapter one. Of course, we learn quite a few intricate details that I think it's important to focus on. So I'm going to walk you guys through those right now. If you want to follow along, you can go ahead and open up that PDF and just go to the specific page when I tell you to. I'll also just try and put the text periodically up on the screen. If you would, let's take a look first at page 4, because this is going to tell us all we really need to know about the relationship between these two guys, right? Like how close they are, how one views the other, etc. So anyway, page 4. Find the line that starts with "for a moment," and we'll pick up there. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then two men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in single file down the path, and even in the open, one stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was small and quick, dark of face with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hands, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes, with wide, sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely. The first man stopped short in the clearing, and the follower nearly ran over him. So besides the physical description that we get of the two guys there, we get the sense that George is kind of always on alert, right? His eyes are described as restless, and so he's like constantly looking around, right, and constantly watching for, where the next problem might be coming from. Whereas Lenny is described as his arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely, right? So he's kind of, he's got this more relaxed body language. He doesn't really think much about anything. He doesn't care much about anything except maybe George, right? And as George, who's leading Lenny along, stops, the follower, Lenny, nearly runs him over, right? He's just this close to George, and also maybe this absent-minded. So two things we learn: his nearness to George, for Lenny, how close he is to George, and then also just maybe how aloof he is, right? Okay, so Steinbeck foreshadows quite a bit throughout this first chapter. And on page 8, if you look around the line, he says, "And you ain't gonna do no bad things like you done in Weed, neither." Weed is the town they came from, and remember, these two guys are traveling or migrant workers, right? So they go from town to town. The last town they were in was Weed, and there was some trouble. What that was, we don't know just yet, but the foreshadowing is certainly there that he already got in trouble very recently. So to elaborate on that, if you take a look at page 11, follow along with the line that starts, "George stood up." George stood up and threw the mouse as far as he could into the darkening brush, and then he stepped to the pool and washed his hands. "You crazy fool, don't you think I could see your feet was wet where you went across the river to get it?" He heard Lenny's whimpering cry and wheeled about, blubbering like a baby. "Jesus Christ, a big guy like you." Lenny's lip quivered and tears started in his eyes. "Aw, Lenny," George put his hand on Lenny's shoulders. "I ain't taking it away just for meanness. That mouse ain't fresh, Lenny, and besides, you broke it petting it. You get another mouse that's fresh and I'll let you keep it for a little while." Lenny sat down on the ground and hung his head dejectedly. "I don't know where there is no other mouse. I remember a lady used to give 'em to me, every one she got, but that lady ain't here." George scoffed. "Lady, huh? Don't even remember who that lady was. That was your own Aunt Clara, and she stopped giving 'em to you. You always killed 'em." Lenny looked sadly up at him. "They was so little," he said apologetically. "I'd pet 'em, and pretty soon they bit my fingers, and I pinched their heads a little, and then they was dead because they was so little. I wished we'd get the rabbits pretty soon, George. They ain't so little." So a couple things here. One, firstly, we learned that Lenny is he doesn't even remember his own family. Literally, the only family he has is George, right? His own Aunt Clara. He's never described as having a mother or a father, but rather an aunt. So we can imagine he was abandoned or something happened to his parents. But anyway, he doesn't remember his own aunt, right? He described her as some lady used to give these mice to me, and George is like bewildered. He's like, "You don't even remember your own aunt? Are you kidding me?" What this says about Lenny is George is his family now. So we understand again the closeness both physically and emotionally between these two guys. Anyway, we get a sense of their dream. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but Lenny continuously talks about rabbits, right? He's like, "Oh, I wish we'd get these rabbits soon. Tell me about the rabbits," right? And we'll talk more about what that is in a little bit here. On page 12, Steinbeck reveals what the problem in weed was for Lenny and George. If you look at the line, "There's enough beans for 4 men." George is about to, they're eating dinner. George has kind of cooked these beans on the open fire, and Lenny has just kept asking him, like, "Hey, I'd love some ketchup with these." George has told him multiple times, like, "We don't have any ketchup." So George is finally going to blow up, and he's going to reveal to us, out of anger, what Lenny did back in weed. "There's enough beans for 4 men, George said. Lenny watched him from over the fire. He said patiently, "I like 'em with ketchup." "Well, we ain't got any," George exploded. "Whatever we ain't got, that's what you want."
George? George?
What you want?
George, I was only fooling. I don't want no ketchup.
It was here, you could have some.
George, I wouldn't eat no ketchup. I'd leave it all for you, and you could cover your beans with it. I wouldn't touch none of it.
When I think of the swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. Never get any peace. If I was alone, I could live so easy. I could get a job and work and no trouble. No mess at all. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50, I could go into town, I could get whatever I want. I could stay in a cat house all night. What do I got? I got you. You can't keep a job. Lose me every job I get. Keep me shoving all over the country all the time. That ain't the worst. You get in trouble, you do bad things, and I got to get you out all the time.
He took on the elaborate manner of little girls when they are mimicking one another. "Just wanted to feel that girl's dress. Just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse." Well, how the hell did she know you just wanted to feel her dress? She jerks back and you hold on it like it was a mouse, and she yells, and we gotta hide in an irrigation ditch all day with guys looking for us, and we gotta sneak out in the dark and get out of the country. All the time, something like that. All the time. I wished I could put you in a cage with about 1,000,000 mice and let you have fun. His anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly at the flames. Okay, so in this scene here, obviously George reveals to us that sometimes he feels like Lenny is a burden on him. George is like, if I was just free of you, I could go and do all these fun things, right? But as soon as he sees the look on Lenny's face, he feels ashamed, it's described, right? And so we understand that George, while he might feel that way from time to time, he might feel like Lenny's a burden, ultimately he loves this guy, right? And he's ashamed to think that to think of the idea of leaving him. Anyway, Lenny very simply thinks that this whole outburst was about ketchup because that's what made George start yelling. So he's like, I don't need ketchup anymore. But we learn that the problem in Weed was that Lenny was petting or touching a girl's dress and didn't know when to stop, and she thought that he was getting too aggressive, so she screamed out, and that got them into trouble and run out of town. So here, take a look at this scene from the film.
George, what? Tell me like he done before.
Tell you what.
About the rabbits.
Not tonight.
Come on, George. Tell like he done before, please, please, please.
You get a kick out of that, don't you? Okay. I will. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family and they don't belong no place. They got nothing to look ahead to.
But not us, George. Tell about us now.
Well, we ain't like that. No. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. If them other guys gets in jail, they can rot for all anybody cares.
But not us, George, because I got you to look after me, but then you got me to look after. But George, tell about how it's gonna be.
With someday, we're gonna have us a little house and a couple of acres, and the cow and the pig
and chicken. And we're gonna live off the fat of the land, George, and have rabbits.
And have rabbits.
Okay, so, last week we started off with our discussion of the American dream and, what your American dream is or what the American dream looks like to many people. And for Lenny and George, the American dream is pretty simple, right? They want to have their own piece of land. Remember, they're migrant workers, so they move from town to town, from state to state. They just want to stay in one place and have something that is their own, right? And as they say over and over again, live off the fat of the land, right? Meaning like they would grow their own vegetables and fruit, so they would never need anyone else to help them with anything. These are guys who want to isolate themselves from the world because maybe it has done them dirty. They are living in the Great Depression, so yeah, definitely they're going to feel that way. And, they just want to be by themselves. That's their dream. Keep that in mind because we're going to read The Great Gatsby after this, and the dreams of the wealthy are very different from the dreams of the impoverished, right? Whereas here, Lenny and George just want a piece of land, just something of their own that they can call their own. The characters in Gatsby want, some things that are maybe a little bit more vain or just selfish, I guess. Anyway, last piece that I want to take a look at, and maybe I'm thinking too deeply about this, but page 18, the last chapter, or the last page of the chapter, take a look. The red light dimmed on the coals. Up the hill from the river, a coyote hammered, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. The sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. One thing that always stuck out to me here was in this valley that they are kind of falling asleep in. They're making their way to the ranch and they were dropped off a little too early. So they have to walk the rest of the way. They spend the night in the woods together. Anyway, in the woods, in this valley, they hear a coyote hammering or yammering, depending on the version you have, and then a dog answering it. And what I think about in that situation is the difference between a dog and a coyote. Obviously, they're both like canines, right? But the key difference between those two canines is that one is domesticated and one is wild, right? And can a dog and a coyote ever coexist? Again, maybe I'm thinking too much about it, but I don't think so. Maybe in some really rare instances, sure, wild animals can coexist with domesticated animals, but I think the idea that Steinbeck is alluding to here is the difference between these two animals. While they are the same, they are different and ultimately can never coexist, right? And I think that's another symbolic foreshadowing of Lenny and George's relationship. These are two really similar guys. They want the same things. They come from the same places, but ultimately their differences are going to drive them apart in the long run. Now, am I thinking too much about dogs and coyotes? Maybe, but who knows? Anyway, the discussion questions for chapter 1 are uploaded on the channel at the very top. So take a look at those and respond to one. We'll talk more about them on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we'll talk more about those discussion questions. But now that you have a better idea of some of the deeper meaning in Chapter 1, go ahead and dive into Chapter 2 as they kind of reach the ranch that they're going to be working on, see their relationships. A lot of characters are going to be introduced to you, and the really annoying thing about it is almost half of them, their names start with C, right? You've got Crooks, Candy, Curly's wife, Carlson, so many C names, and I don't know that there's a reason for it, to be honest, but it is annoying. Just keep track of that. The questions, there are 10 questions this time, so just do those as you read or after you read, and I will see you guys on Wednesday for a close read of Chapter 2 and a discussion or diving into your discussion questions from Chapter 1. All right?